All right, let's get started. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. My name is Tim Passhuizen. I'm the co-founder of Stylelabs. This is how you can contact me. Please do, if you have any questions, if you want to reach out, if you have any comments, I'd love to have feedback. So you can reach me, tim@stylelabs.com, or on Twitter @timpashuizen. Also, if you're interested, this is how you can follow us, hashtag Marketing Content Hub or @Stylelabs News. This webinar is really about two things. First of all, we want to explain how we came up with the idea of a Marketing Content Hub, the vision and the software product behind it. And then secondly, we want to talk to you about why you should consider having one. How did all of this start? Well, it really started with us being involved in marketing technologies. And what we saw was that most of the RFPs we got in, or most of the projects that we saw, were labeled dumb. And it's probably not a surprise because dumb is by now an established software category. It's probably also one of the most common or most known labels that people can put on a marketing technology software. And it is, by its functionality, kind of a baseline. It's a starting point. But then again, if you opened up the RFPs and you started reading them, there was a lot of things in there, a lot of requirements, a lot of use cases, but also a lot of business cases in there that didn't really fit dumb too well. So what is dumb really? Where it comes down to is the business case for dumb is usually our organization needs a repository to store and retrieve media files. If you look a little bit closer and more into detail, if we describe that in terms of use cases, there's a number of use cases that you can see in a dumb platform. It's about uploading files and maybe reviewing them. It's about storing those files somewhere and storing the metadata that you use to qualify them so that you can later retrieve them. It's about managing the life cycle of a file. When is a file approved? When is it published? When is it retired? Is there an embargo date, etc.? It is obviously also about being able to search into that repository of files and hopefully find something. You can also usually transform files, like transcode a high-res PSD file to a JPEG in low-res, maybe change the color space, and finally, facilitate the distribution of those files. That pretty much wraps up a traditional dumb platform. Now, in those RFPs or in those projects that clients present to us, there's usually a number of different requirements or use cases present. And this is a selection from those. Primary marketing content is scattered. We see that a lot. People need to look for bits and pieces of marketing content all over the place. Collaboration is not efficient. This focuses on the processes around content. Cannot store and find marketing content. I have a piece of content, but I don't really have a platform that's suited to receive that, so I keep it in a drawer of my desk on a DVD. I need to set up a dialogue with the marketing community. There's a lot of people working around our brand, but we don't really have a way to speak to them, to share best practices. Omnichannel publishing challenges. More and more channels are becoming inevitable, and you basically want to have a consistent message across those channels, and preferably one that leverages the qualities of each channel to the best extent you can. Leverage structured content in documents. If you have structured content, you may need to automate the layout of that for publications. Content marketing challenges in general. Marketing messages are not just invented anymore, they are based on facts nowadays. And that's an additional challenge. Multilingual content and marketing localizations, which includes the repetitive aspect of marketing production. And then an extensive marketing community that includes marketeers, both strategic and production, but also agencies, product managers, sales, maybe retail partners or other external parties. So all of these use cases and requirements are maybe or are very often very real, but not covered by the DAM business case. So this is the piece where we would like to introduce the Marketing Content Hub, because we think that that could be an answer to those use cases. First of all, if we walk into the room and we place ourselves in the position of our clients, which is most often a marketeer or a product manager in a larger company, this is more or less where that person is standing. On the left-hand side, there is a host of different platforms that own bits and pieces of marketing content. They can be traditional silos, master data platforms such as ERP or PLM system, where an ERP will maybe own something like your commercial product catalog, knowing which SKU is available in which market. But of course, also a lot of other stuff that you're not really interested in as marketeer. A PLM system is also very extensive in its scope, but there's a couple of items in there that you could use from a marketing perspective, like product specifications that are really customer facing. It can also be external processes or external suppliers, like an agency or maybe another supplier that owns a piece of marketing content that you're interested in, or a legacy platform, or maybe an MRM platform. Most of these platforms are not owned by marketing either, so there's not a lot of leverage to ask for things there. And then on the right-hand side is the real challenge, all of these publication channels where marketing needs to bring a message that is probably based on content marketing, and that also needs to be consistent and as rich as possible across those channels, omnichannel. So this is the challenge. There's a couple of different places where you can go and stand. We see that a lot of marketing technologies companies are standing on either the left or the right-hand side, being either a master data platform or a publication channel. We think that that doesn't cover what your marketeer is struggling with right now if we're talking about marketing content. We think that the position in the middle is interesting, and that is why we chose the position in the middle. Also, we specifically didn't visualize this as something that goes end-to-end from the far left to the far right. This is how other people in the marketing technology space are positioning themselves, as a suite of products that covers your process end-to-end. We think that that end-to-end process touches on so many different disciplines, so many different expertise domains, that it's quite ambitious, to say the least, to claim that as something that you could do from a single product or a single source or a single vendor. So we like to focus on the place in the middle where you see the black dot that says Marketing Content Hub, because that is a place where our client, the marketeer or the product manager, exactly is standing. So how does this build up? The first central piece in this is the black dot, the Marketing Content Hub. And this is our marketing content repository. It is not a DAM, it is not a PIM, it can be both. It is a marketing content repository, and that includes both file-based and non-file-based content. So we can do files, but we also think that non-file-based content is important as well. This is not just metadata. Metadata is the piece of data that you use to qualify and classify, if you will, the real thing that you're storing. It's like putting a label on a book so that you know in which shelf it goes and that you will find it later. But there's also proper data. For example, a commercial product description or a list of commercial benefits that has been copyrighted, that has been reviewed for technical specifications by R&D, that has been reviewed by legal, that maybe has gone through regulatory approval processes, that has been translated into multiple languages. That is an asset in itself that is as valuable as a picture of that product. So there's a lot of non-file based content that is important to marketing as well. We also think that they shouldn't be separated, but we'll discuss that in a couple of slides. There's two outer layers to this repository. The first outer layer is the creative project management and collaboration tools. And this is really a layer supporting the central repository, because a lot of processes are going on that work with the content that is sitting in the middle. It's about aggregation, enriching, creating new content, maybe localizing that content, and finally getting it to the publication channels. And those processes could be supported. And the angle we take there is project management, creative project management and collaboration tools. And that is the second topic that we'll discuss in a little bit more detail. Finally, the outer layer that says marketing and brand portal, which is basically a CMS-like functionality. It allows you to build pages in a sitemap-like structure, and it gives a place for editorial content to live. Whereas the central piece is structured content, the outer layer is editorial content, it's pages. And they work together because they belong together. It's like, from a very practical angle, the descriptive side of corporate branding guidelines that go hand in hand with the files, the logos, or other architectural devices. But it could also be, and that is a slightly more interesting piece, a way to set up that dialogue with your marketing community. Start talking to the people who are working around your brand. And so this is a third topic that we will discuss. And then on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side, there's two arrows. The left arrow is about aggregating the content that lives in other upstream platforms. Those bits and pieces that we're interested in, they need to get into the middle part. And then on the right-hand side, there is the arrow towards the publication channels. That is facilitating the publication process towards those channels. And that is a fourth topic, apologies, that I will discuss. So let's get started with first build a 360-degree interaction on all of your marketing content, our first one. If we look at this diagram and we look at the software platforms on the left-hand side, you will see that different traditional software categories manage their own scope. Like, for example, if you have a DAM, which includes the scope of managing media files, you will see that it brings the entities of asset and layout to the table. An asset could be an image, a layout could be a brochure, and the image is used in the brochure, so that is a relation between those two entities. And then if we translate this in terminology of domain model, which is a concept from the IT world, the two entities that are managed by DAM are assets and layouts. And then a product information management system, a PIM, would typically bring other entities. For example, market, product family, product or SKU. An MRM would bring yet different entities, and an ERP would bring different entities. And then there's a number of entities that are not really managed by platforms because they're really specific to the way that you organize your marketing business. For example, season, model, channel, agency. Those are not entities that are familiar to traditional software categories. And so what you see is that you need to allocate different pieces of content that really belong together in different silos. And at best, they may be integrated, maybe some point-to-point integrations, maybe even an ESB in the middle, but they're still in different silos. A second element in that discussion is that once you start implementing this, the discussion very quickly turns towards techie lingo that is really coming from those pieces of software. Like this would be how a vendor meeting would look like. While if we're listening in on a business conversation at the client side, it would probably be around completely different concepts or entities. So those are two things that we like to turn around. The way that we like to look at things is we like to start with a conversation and listen to how you organize your marketing business. And then draw up a diagram of that business universe, the domain model for your business universe, and try to capture the structure and relationships of that. And what we see here is a diagram that we drew up for a food retailer. And there's conventional stuff in there that you would probably recognize from some of those conventional categories, like the bottom left part that says SKU and campaign and two types of publications, a folder and a point of sales material, and then an asset, a product image. That is pretty much a combination of PIM and DAM scope. But then it gets a little bit more tricky because this food retailer, when they write an article for a magazine and the theme is Mediterranean food, they want to have a piece on olive oil. And then they need information about the generic product of olive oil. They need to describe how the origin of olive oil from Spain or from Italy or from Greece is different and has a different flavor profile and different benefits. And that is information that is not suited to PIM or DAM. It's quite unique to the way that they organize their business. And that is, for example, the ingredients you would see. And then the ingredient would be used in an article. An ingredient could have a season, like for example, if it's fruit or vegetable, chances are that there's a specific season associated with it. There could be recipes, there could be chefs that write these recipes, and this really makes up a client-driven domain model. To us, that is the key starting point in the way that we look at our software, but also at the implementation and also at the way we present it in the user interface. This is the leitmotif for anything we do here. So let's make this a little bit more tangible and show you what it looks like, because it's more than just a data model. First of all, a homepage. This is not just an application. It presents itself as a website, as a portal site that does more than present a search on a database. Like for example, if you have a lot of people working on a campaign, it's important that you are able to bring them the conceptual message of that campaign. There may be a freelancer that is working for a production agency that is working for your local field marketing in a very remote market. And that person needs to be able to brief himself not just on the facts, but also on the spirit of your campaign in an efficient way. And so the outer wrapper that we will elaborate on a little bit further of the marketing portal is a way to do that. So let's dive into the repository now. This is an example page of a search in a repository. And a lot of this will seem very familiar. Like on the left-hand side, you have those search tools that you would typically find in any good DAM or in an e-commerce platform. Full text search, clustered faceted search, detailed search options, saving searches, etc., etc. Except for the fact that on the right-hand side, in this search example, we see ingredients. It's not assets, it's ingredients. And the entity shown as a search result here is an ingredient. And these can be any of those entities that we showed before. It could be a product, it could be a SKU, it could be a campaign, it could be an ingredient, but it could also be a recipe or a chef. So all of the entities that we define in that client-driven domain model can show up as entities and can have a detail page. So if we click through on one of those search results, we could end up on a detail page for chives. And this is not a detail page for a picture, it's a detail page for a generic ingredient, which has a description for that ingredient, like how do you buy it, how do you store it, how do you prepare it. but it also has relationships, like a relationship to an asset, a picture of chives, a relationship to other ingredients, like other fresh herbs, and a relationship to, for example, recipes where chives are used. Another detail page could be the detail page of a chef. And then again, a chef would have different properties. A chef would have a bio, a chef would probably have restaurants or other things, maybe books that person wrote, episodes, links, and most importantly, recipes. And then we could click to a recipe and see the ingredients, and that way everything is related to everything, and you can actually walk on those relationships by clicking in the UI. This is not just about aggregating content. We can aggregate content that is born elsewhere, but we can also author new content. Like, for example, imagine that these fields are owned by the Marketing Content Hub and not by an upstream system. Then we can actually allow people to edit them, to enrich them, and to work on the content right here. That was the first piece, the central core of the repository. The second piece is that next outer layer, the marketing project management and collaboration piece. We're looking at marketing content creation processes here, and there's a number of different processes that are very close to our marketing content hub. Creation of artwork, creation of layouts, but also copywriting, which is non-file based probably, product content, which is probably also non-file based, but also 3D production, video production, interactive design, and translation and localization. These are all typical content creation processes that we can support by using the project management piece of the Marketing Content Hub. We specifically call this marketing project management because we think that project management and the role of the project manager is central in the approach here. There are different platforms out there, different tools that have a different approach. For example, a lot of tools offer a BPMS-based workflow, where the idea is that you use a BPMS tool, and by defining or configuring a specific workflow in there, you would support that marketing process. Our opinion is that a lot of marketing processes are a poor fit for a BPMS approach. First of all, BPMS requires a pretty exactly defined process. Anything that is a little bit more fluid or a little bit more variable will somehow cause problems in a BPMS-based workflow. And oftentimes people will say that this is because marketing doesn't have their act together enough. To a certain extent, we see a lot of times that within a larger organization, marketing was one of the last departments to think in a process way. So there could be a little bit of a lack of maturity in there. But the reality is probably closer to the fact that most marketing processes have a lot of variations in them, are complicated, are touching on a lot of stakeholders and a lot of different sub-processes. And so it's not always easy to define them in an exact way. We think that the solution is to focus on the project manager. Your project manager, with his or her skills, knowledge about the company, knowledge about the process, is really the fact that could bring your process from A to B. And so what we do is we place the project manager central, and we facilitate and we empower the project manager with tools from the project management angle, but also tools for the team that is collaborating on this process. And so another popular category within the marketing technologies, review and annotation, is one of those building blocks. It doesn't drive the process, it's not defining the process, but it is an important building block in those tools that you use to make things more efficient and to empower specifically your marketing team who is collaborating. Other tools include dashboards, the ability to upload and submit files, calendaring tools, reporting, analytics, Gantt charts, tasks, etc. and maybe for a very specific subset of these processes, even BPMS workflows. The way that we approach it is pretty simple, and we usually explain it with these 3 building blocks. There's 3 building blocks that your project manager can use to build a process. And building a process is quite literally by point and click in a UI in the browser, configure this process or pull it up from a template and adapt it to the specific situation. The first building block is the rectangular gray one, which is a building block that allows you to build hierarchies. It allows you to build a tree, and the tree can be any form of tree. This example is a very conventional example of program, project, job, or activity if you want. But it could also be market, brand, campaign, job, or any other configuration that suits your needs. It's also something that can be done ad hoc by the project manager, depending on the project he or she is defining. Once we have that hierarchy, there's a second thing that we can do, and that is define milestones. And the milestones are the orange dots. The orange dots are related to one of the gray entities. So it's always a sequence in time that reflects milestones on one of those entities in the tree. And an example, again, this can be templated or it can be made ad hoc or it can even be changed at runtime. But an example could be that you have milestone 1 for briefing, milestone 2 for creative drafts and approval, milestone 3 for post-production, milestone 4 for legal approval, and milestone 5 for publication. I'm just making this up actually as we go. And the idea is that within each milestone, there's a certain target of something that we want to accomplish. And the project manager is responsible for sending out the tasks to the appropriate team members and finally making the decision if this target has been accomplished or not. Like if your milestone 1 is briefing, then your project manager will probably fill in some of the briefing himself and then ask other people to complete that briefing until the point that he is satisfied and can close that gate and move to the next milestone. A way to visualize this a little bit more, it's of course all browser-based. It's about presenting all of the right tools, but not more than that into the right interface. The idea is also that milestone by milestone, a project manager can compose this layout and can decide what tools go on the page or not. Also, keeping track of comments, keeping track of validations, keeping track of discussions, not having to go into email conversations to resolve a dispute on a decision, etc., etc. It's all part of the application. Important in this piece, well, really any UI we build is responsive and is challenged against the mobile first principle. Admittedly, not every use case is as strong for mobile as the other ones, but we see specifically in the collaboration piece, in the approval end of it, that a lot of people who need to make approvals are all day in meetings and they probably have a tablet in their hands, but it's difficult to convince them to look into something outside of that scope of time. So if you can enable them to comment and annotate on a tablet or their phone, that could take away a potential bottleneck. And so in those use cases, responsive design and touch-enabled interfaces are not just a gimmick anymore. It's there, it's real, and it can solve a real bottleneck in your business process. The third element that we wanted to discuss was setting up the dialogue with your marketing community. And a very simple first thing is that we strongly believe that you should look at this as a portal, as a website, and not just as an application. It is something that is targeted towards marketeers. So you should speak their language and you should actually practice what you preach. If you are very much pushing that people should use appropriately branded communications, then your UI should follow that same principle. On top of that, any business case that is based on a certain return on investment is based on the fact that people need to use this. Otherwise, your return on investment is not going to happen. And for people to use this, it needs to be such that people like to use it, because making people use something doesn't really work out that well. So we think that convincing your client, your internal client, to use the application is all about making the switch of seeing this through the same eyes as a B2C platform. If you think about an e-commerce platform, you think about conversions. You want to know how people ended up clicking away halfway a process because you missed a conversion. Well, the same logic applies when we build a marketing content hub. We think that a business task is a conversion that somehow brings value to the company. And if you can get people to do it through the portal, if you can get people to finish it, then you have a conversion. If they don't, you need to look into that and you need to tweak it. What this does is it adds editorial content and context that complements the structured data in the repository. This is something that we already briefly touched on. And let me explain with examples from two angles. There's a practical and a more strategic angle. The practical angle is, for example, the guidelines example. Adding the guidelines, the descriptive guidelines to the logos, the files in the central piece is one of the applications of this functionality. Another application could be providing information for external agencies on how you want your graphical assets to be delivered. That could be another practical end. A more strategic and probably a more interesting one is to try to get people to be informed about the strategic positioning of a product, the strategic message behind the campaign, but also provides benchmarking or peer learning for people that are doing similar tasks in a different environment, across brands, across markets, etc. It's basically setting up a dialogue with your marketing community and acknowledging the fact that a lot of people are working around your brand, and that if you can get them to learn from each other, to speak to each other, then that could benefit your marketing process. And then finally, facilitate omnichannel publishing and content marketing. And then if we look at the diagram again, this is really the right-hand angle here, arrow here, I'm sorry. It's about facilitating the distribution of that content towards publication channels. And we take a pretty humble stance there. We say that we will facilitate, so we have the content, it's aggregated, it's enriched, it's available in a clean format. And we can facilitate a lot. If you need a thumbnail that is resampled to 250 on 150 pixels, and if you need it on a transparent PNG, we can do that for you. If you need us to filter out all of the SKUs that are available in a specific market, we can do that for you. If you need an XML file or some other format of the product description in a specific language, side by side with those thumbnails, we can do that for you as well. Or if you need to push this to Amazon and you need it in an old school Excel file with a specific formatting, we can do that as well. So it's about facilitating the distribution of all of that beautiful data that we have sitting in the middle. And what is key here is we have a worker framework, we have a hypermedia connector. Hypermedia connector is what is called Richardson Level 3 mature, which basically means that it's discoverable. If you navigate to the API with a browser, you can see what you can buy from the API. You can see how it's structured. You can see the links to related entities. You can actually click them. You can see what different renditions for an asset are available. You can see what different properties are available, etc. Now, value. Because if this is something that hits a note that is familiar, you probably need to build a business case around it in order to make this happen. So what is the value that the marketing content hub can actually bring to you? The first angle we take here is a very practical one. It's the tangible return on investment, the dollars or the euros for that matter, that allow you to offset it against the investment. This is basically what we use mostly to build a business case in terms of if we do this, we will benefit in a money value. And there's 3 parameters you can use, and together they make up what we call the triangle of value. There's quality, there's cost, and there's speed. Cost is probably within these practical parameters the most straightforward one. If you can define a handful of use cases that are relatively well defined and repetitive, like we know that people are looking for product content 10,000 times a year, which is a true world example. And we know that it takes an hour of an internal FTE plus an hour of an agency that we also pay by the hour. Then you can actually calculate a cost for that process as it is right now. And then if we can tell you that, or if we can prove you that in a future state with the Marketing Content Hub, half of the requests won't even hit your internal FTE because the agency can self-service, and that if the request is a little bit more complicated, people will find that content in 20 minutes instead of an hour, and you multiply that gain by 10,000, you're very quickly building a dollars or a euro number that is a good candidate to be offset against a considerable investment. And then secondly, quality, a little bit less easy to modify, but still important. If you're facing challenges of getting the right product specs out across different channels, if you have customer complaints, maybe even have liabilities about the quality of the data that you get into your publication channels, that could be a sensitive topic to include in a business case. And then speed. Some markets, some very consumer-oriented markets, are all about speeds, getting things to markets in order for it to hit a market in time with the competition, seasonality, etc. So sometimes if you can just speed up a time to market process, that's maybe even enough for your business case. But still, this is all about shaving off 10, 20, 30% of a number of parameters to get to a money value. It gets a little bit more interesting, but probably also a little bit more challenging in defining the value. If we talk about strategic benefits, and the way that we like to look at this is oftentimes marketing operations is considered part of the problem. Now, what would happen if you would be able to predict how you could, in a cost-controlled, quality-controlled fashion, get something in the market from a certain product range in a controlled amount of time? What if you could actually measure that? And what if you could document that? And what if you could predict that next time you will be able to guarantee that? Well, at that point, you would be part of the no-go or the go decision, and you would be actually part of the problem rather than the solution. And of course, this all needs to be translated into the specific business that your organization is in. But it's a powerful idea. It's the idea that once we get over the hurdle of defining the dollar value to offset that to the investment, we can get a little bit more ambitious and actually present this as a catalyst for getting towards a strategic benefit. So this actually concludes my presentation. Thank you all for attending. It was an interesting audience. I've seen a couple of familiar faces, but also new faces on the attendees list, both brand owners, agencies, consultants, even some analysts. So we hope this was informative. We hope it was maybe even a little bit inspirational. The long version of this is a book that we wrote. You can ask for a hard copy on the first URL here, marketingcontenthub.com/publications. If you just want to download a PDF, that's on the second URL. So feel free to do that, of course. And then any comments, any thoughts, any further questions, any specific follow-up you want to do, please do reach out, tim@stylelabs.com and at Tim Passhuizen on Twitter. So thank you for attending. Have a nice day and hope to speak to you soon. Thank you.